Hello everyone and welcome again to Failure and Analysis. My name is Kevin Jordan and today we are reacting to the conversation with Ian Hazzikostas and Preach. Great video I've heard a lot about and I'm really interested to watch. It's about Shadowlands and various systems within Shadowlands. And so let's fire it up. I think I'm going to have a lot to say. I'm expecting to agree with Ian more than I've probably ever agreed with him in my life, and possibly disagree with Preach. Let's see how it goes, but that's my expectation. I haven't actually watched this video yet, so I might have my mind blown as well, but hang out and let's watch. Hopefully it won't be too long, but buckle up.
Hey everybody, a little heads up before we get started here is this is going to be a little different than the interviews you've seen in the past with the devs. This time around, Blizzard requested a discussion on this topic rather than a normal interview where we would have a whole array of questions covering many different subjects. That was not the aim or the intention of this. It was the first time ever I'm aware of that Blizzard has agreed or requested to actually sit down and have a back and forth with the members of the community. Luckily I was chosen. I'm very grateful.
Also, Preach seems to be off the hot seat from his little previous adventures that got him deprived of things in the past. So all is forgiven. Good for Preach.
For that. So I hope you enjoy it and understand why it's not just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, etc. Let's get on with it. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been uproar. Basically down to videos made by certain people who will remain unnamed, and we have on the line, coming from Team USA, the man in charge of all these things, Mr. Ian Hazzikostas himself. I would just like to extend our gratitude. Mr. Ian, welcome.
Hey Mike, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
It is. It's great to talk to you again. We didn't get much of a chance last time. It was a very brief, huddled into a small room.
All the way back at BlizzCon, I remember.
Yeah, you promised me a beer, by the way, which never happened. BlizzCon is a whirlwind. I don't know
First promise undelivered, right there. Count it.
how anyone makes it through those 3 days, but I miss it. I can't wait until we can all actually be back together in person.
I know, it's been a really unfortunate time for that kind of thing. BlizzCon is one of the best experiences.
2008, so 2 years overlap, because I left 2010.
For anybody who hasn't been to BlizzCon, I recommend you try and get there because it is wonderful. How are you working? How are you guys working, especially with the Shadowlands coming?
I mean, at this point, this is the new normal. I think we've kind of found a groove. There was definitely a few weeks of just, figuring out using the tools from home, getting everybody's webcam and all that set up. I think the biggest challenge was, meetings actually are great. Probably even more efficient in a lot of ways than being physically present in the same room. The biggest challenge, I think, was the impromptu creative brainstorming jam sessions that often just happen, bouncing an idea off somebody in the hallway or swinging by somebody's desk. Trying to recreate those moments that are important for creativity when we're all, in a more structured home environment. It's been a challenge, but I think we figure things out. Yeah,
we've had the same issue here, obviously on a smaller scale. Especially when we're bouncing ideas around for our bigger content, we're having to do it through Discord and things. It's not that same creative soup that you can kind of make when everybody's just flying things out very quickly. Now, obviously, this is going to be more of a conversation, is the message I got regarding some recent things. Because, I mean, coming from, let me explain my standpoint, is one, the Covenants look fantastic. What we've seen, and you've expanded and fleshed them out.
Failure 3 Ion.
More games. Thank you for the 5 months. Appreciate it.
The way the zones are being modified, all those elements just look so wonderful. And of course, the transmog, the mounts, all those elements. But the concern has been raised many, many times since the alpha, is that you've taken a position that we've not seen before, is that you're going to be bringing in class abilities that are going to be locked off to those players. And the more we look to the future on this issue, is that it seems like it disrupts not only the top end, which is where a lot of the sort of focused arguments and emotional arguments have been, but actually can resonate throughout that community, all the way to every level of play. including guys who just want to play around with something for a little while and will be unable to do so. So we're just looking to get an idea of why we've made that choice, why you think that's a benefit.
So I think, okay, a lot of it comes down to a question of identity versus moment-to-moment decisions. And I think WoW as a whole, games as a whole, are arguably a large set of choices and decisions that you make on a wide
Preach is jealous of the hair. So good.
range. I think in WoW, if you, I like this, if you had a whiteboard or something to illustrate on, but if you imagine a spectrum of permanence and scope of a decision you make, and at one end of that spectrum is the first decision you make when you start playing World of Warcraft. What's your class? That is completely permanent. Obviously, you can make separate characters, but there is no way to change that. That affects a vast array of your capabilities and strengths, and that is like the foundation of identity in WoW. Race alongside that, though that's more malleable, has lower impact. On the far other end of the spectrum.
All right, I don't want to accuse, but I'm happy that he's talking about identity. Not identity politics, but a sense of identity. And bringing that sense of identity back to WoW. Ananga, thank you for the Twitch Prime. It's something I've talked about a lot. As you guys know, I've been hanging out in the channel. And how important it is to, just role-playing games in general. But it's also, again, that first thing we do, like at the start of the stream when I played that vanilla cinematic, right? Like, how many of you, before even having the game in your hands, picked one of those characters from the cinematic and said, I want to be that, right? And you start imagining what that was going to mean. Oh my God, I'm going to have a bear pet and I'm going to shoot a rifle. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to have an undead, a Forsaken Warlock, and I'm going to summon... I can't remember the name now. I'm going to call down the meteor and summon, the big demons. That it's so important for capturing Inferno. Thank you. Infernal. It's so important for capturing your imagination and starting that process of dreaming, right? And that's what you bring to the game. And then the game tries to help you live out that fantasy, right? So that's the other end, is what we call the class fantasy or the race fantasy or whatever it is. And I know you're thinking night elf female when I say race fantasy, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you come with a dream and the game tries to let you live that dream, right? And identity is critical to that. So it has to be nurtured and thought through. And every time you make everything changeable and transient, where nobody gets attached to anything, you change that dynamic.
I mean, there's also micro choices, like literally what button are you going to press next while you're in the middle of a combat. But there are the choices that you make that are more a loadout. They're not part of your identity. They are... what are the tools that you're taking into this boss encounter, into this arena match, into this Mythic Plus? Pick your talents, equip your trinkets, what consumables are you using, all of that. Those are decisions that you are making tailored to a specific situation, but they're not part of your identity. If you take...
Right, so that's that scale I talked about. You have class and race over here, which are permanent. You have items over here, where you can switch them out. As long as you have the items, you get to switch them out, whatever you need for certain things, right? And there's a whole range. All the systems are going to fall within this scale, right? And it's okay for games to have the full, the full range of those things. But players nowadays seem to want everything to be over here, which is very damaging to that sense of identity, which is what he's talking about. So agree so far.
Windrush Totem as a shaman, you're not a Windrush Totem shaman. That's not like who you are in WoW. That's just something you're using for a situation. And covenants from the outset were imagined as something that were closer to the identity end of the spectrum. And that, like, from the earliest conception, it was, this is a weighty choice that you're going to make.
Weighty. I like it.
And to be weighty, the choice has to have some degree of consequence. And we know there's a wide variety of playstyles and preferences across WoW. Some people are literally in it just for the transmog. Others are in it for increasing their number by 0.1%, and that is the thing that's most important to them. And both, and a mix, and everything in between. And so
I really like that, because I'm going to come back to that definition. Almost exactly that. So it's very well put, and I agree with him on that as well. We're in dangerous territory, people. We're in very dangerous territory.
We want to make this as an informed decision as possible, as much as we can. But I think the goal in creating a choice is for it to be a difficult one. Ideally, you know, if you're looking at two options, there should be some things that pull you in one direction and some things that pull you in the other. And you take one fork in the road, and that becomes a part of who you are going forward. That's again, that is, as you said, as I've said a bunch in the past, a core RPG element. It's differentiation.
Dylan!
And while yes, when faced with any difficult choice, of course you'd like to say, well, I don't want to choose, I want to have everything, or I want to have the best parts of bucket A in the situations where those are best, and I want the best parts of bucket B in the situations where those are best. But that's a natural desire to opt out of the choice, but the choice is what adds some richness and depth to the world and greater variety among the characters that we play, the interactions that we have, the strengths and weaknesses that we bring to bear in any given encounter, in any given situation we get into.
Okay.
Is this the first time Ian's talked about this stuff at length? Like, this is like, you know, I'm always second guessing him, right? Like, I don't think he came to Blizzard with this kind of knowledge, right? But I've always believed that people can grow and they can change and they can improve, right? While on the job, certainly. You get better at what you do. But he was on a very different path than I was. But I'm always curious, you know, like, and also just like, again, as part of my channel, I've always wanted to be able to influence game design, you know, in the bigger picture as much as I could, because I'm not in the industry, but I still want to play amazing games. And so I want to, you know, personally, this is my way of influencing, you know, games that are more fun for me to enjoy. If I can convince by any means someone to make games that more in line with my philosophies, then I get to play better games. The same you guys do as well every time you talk about games and give your feedback. And so I'm always curious, like, every time things like this happen, like where my influence starts and ends, you know, if at all, right? Obviously, probably just hubris, you know, and thinking that I have any influence on Ian at all, but I'm always curious.
I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack there. And I think the biggest frustration we probably feel with this is, one, most of us probably agree with that goal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that goal. And certainly, from my understanding of not only my own point of view, but of many others, and we did a lot of research into this, there's no one asking not to swap covenants. In fact, the idea of committing my character to a covenant is great, and I think it's something that World of Warcraft has lost along the way. It's the practical side of this that really sort of gives it that going too far feel. And historically we have seen the pendulum swing to the point where it's causing a lot of issues. So those issues are far and wide. I mean, you brought up consequences there, and it's something that's very much been tossed around in our research, is like, I like the idea of a consequence. And the issue with that is that consequence is different for everybody. So if your consequence is for somebody who's not particular, because we're only talking about player power here, right? That's the only thing that
Sure.
I'll speak for myself. Only I have a problem with the player power, because that severely impacts my gameplay, and it impacts the choices I might want to make down the line. And we're literally talking about potentially giving up a hell of a lot, a very costly price, because when I was leveling, I didn't think that spell was particularly good. And now I realize actually it's pretty good, so I kind of want to try it. I go and try it, and I have to give up my entire Covenant progression for that. I have to do some sort of quest line, and then I get there, and I'm not particularly happy with it, and then I need to do some sort of quite large grind just to come back. And all I wanted to do was try out a spell. You know, that was it. I just wanted to try out that spell. And we would feel, say, a lot of comparisons to TBC with Aldor and Scryer, and people would probably feel very differently if Aldor came with Cloak of Shadows, but Scryer came with Shadow Step. Then we would probably think of those things in a very difficult way. When it comes to the consequences, for a player who's not particularly interested in player power or has less, is less affected by player power, their consequence is almost meaningless. On the other end of the spectrum and everyone in between, there's a huge delta between those two. The consequences is severe, quite severe in terms of what we do, especially given the difficulty we've had in the past with balancing a lot of this stuff. And obviously this time around, you've bitten off a lot more than before, is by introducing multiple systems at once. And we obviously have a lot of pessimistic thoughts, not only from the fun side, that sometimes I do want to play with Abomination's Limbs of Decay. It's hilarious. It just giant slap hands. It's so fun. Do I want to commit to that forever? Nah, not really. But it's hilarious. I want to mess around with it. And I'm a Death Knight, and he's a Death Knight. And I've never in the history of this entire game been told that, no, you can't do what a Death Knight can do.
Yes, you have.
And that's where we kind of fall down with this completely malleable amount of consequence in the actual practical application of this system.
Fair. So getting to the specifics, you know, I think the scenario where you feel like you can't experiment or you can't learn what it's like on the other side of the fence without having to make this big commitment, that is a potentially separate solvable problem. I mean, we're talking about, aside from letting you use the abilities while you level, in the Covenant choice moment itself, having a little vision of your potential future that's like a imaginary battle arena in the Maw, where you can try out the abilities of the Covenant one last time before you commit. I could imagine us keeping that open in all scenarios, so that even if you're in a Covenant, if you want, in a specific context, to play around at length in non-leveling contexts with a Covenant's ability, just to know how it feels without having to make that large commitment, that's a completely reasonable thing to solve.
I don't think they necessarily should solve that, but and when I say you have been denied, I mean, if you're not a Death Knight, you don't get to feel what it's like to be a Death Knight, right? You have to go make a Death Knight if you want to play a Death Knight, right? So again, it's like things on this side of that scale that are permanent choices, and there's a lot of identity and commitment, and you get to experience all the things that come with being that specific race class combination. If you want a different experience, you have to start from scratch, right? So he's trying to put Covenants over here with the class race, you know, choice, and Preach is trying to pretend that it's over here, and he doesn't like the amount of switching, right? But that's not the goal. So he's making the argument that he's never been deprived of using abilities, but he has. Does he have a max race, you know, maximum level character of every race class combination? No, he doesn't. So he has been deprived. It's just a matter of, you know, again, what does he want from this system? I'm going to go a lot more into this. This will be my first major tangent. I'm going to wait for Ian to finish. And then I'm going to go into the first major tangent, because Preach talks about several things here. And it's going to be pretty relevant to this entire discussion. So,
and yes, a lot of this comes down to balance, and that is admittedly a challenge. And there's a lot of the discussion around specific abilities is something we're paying a ton of attention to. Things that are either just incredibly weak, incredibly strong, where it could be a numerical issue, or things that seem inherently unbalanceable, like a cheat death that's available to one subset but not any of the others, and that's just a universally incredible effect. It's hard to stack up against other things. And in some cases, we may need to redesign abilities entirely. Because, yes, differences that you don't have control over can become just purely emotionally negative, especially at the competitive high end, when they're too large. I think, you know, in terms of choice with consequence, I actually, and I know that there were a lot of problems with these systems. If you go back to the beginning of Legion, I think that the choice that everyone had to make at the beginning of Legion of which spec you want to focus on was a more impactful choice, and in many ways a more permanent choice than any choice that awaits you in Shadowlands. Because it wasn't just your artifact weapon, it was also, as we know, legendaries. And those could be weeks apart, and if you were a mage and you started off as fire and you had a couple of fire mage specific legendaries and all of your artifact power in your fire weapon, and you wanted to try out frost, you wanted to go frost for a certain scenario, there were probably literally months ahead of you in order to get to a point of comparable effectiveness. Now that there were problems there. I think the majority of the problems, frankly, were on the legendary side, because once you start talking about, you know, Pyro Bracers and Scorch Belt versus no legendaries, that's like a 15% net effectiveness difference. That's almost an entire tier's worth of gear.
Did you know I played a mage? Did you know I played a mage during this time?
Perhaps.
Yeah, I had to bank my first legendary. It was unfortunate.
But that, and yet, like, so that was something that was in the game, right? And it was disguised in the, you know, construct of a very simple choice you've had to make for a long time. Oh yeah, what spec do you want to play this tier? But that was far weightier. So when we look at Covenants, yes, there are situations where you may wish you had something a different tool available to you. Part of the challenge for us is making sure that the gaps are never too large, and that there's never a universal right or wrong answer, where it's like, oh, you're a rogue and you picked that Covenant. Yeah, that's just the wrong choice. Like, there's never a situation in which you're going to be happy that you're a member of that Covenant as a player of this class. Because, yeah, that's just a trap. But, again, getting back to strengths and weaknesses, you know, I guess a question for you, and for, you know, kind of as a representative of a large portion of the high-end competitive community, you know, I think a trend and something that we have seen on the development team on a regular basis in terms of feedback is the desire to eliminate sources of variance, to eliminate, you know, any form of the dreaded RNG, anything that removes control from a player. Like, do you feel like it's an ideal endpoint for every hunter who is doing a Mythic Raid encounter across the world, really, to basically be the same in terms of their stats, their abilities, and the only difference among them is who can push their buttons more effectively, who can execute the mechanical aspects of their class?
I don't see why that would not be the case. I mean, personally, it's, for me, the difference between somebody who chooses at any point, and this kind of falls back into the discussion we've had, is that over the last couple of expansions, you've certainly muddied the waters of what we enjoy at the high end. And a lot of players don't realize it, but it's been happening since around about Legion, late WoD, when more RNG came into it. And for a lot of us, we genuinely felt so dissatisfied with our own characters because of the changes you guys made. And one of the greatest fun aspects of it was that being able to compete directly, and I can speak from personal experience, is I would compete directly with Razzie, I was a Death Knight, he was a Death Knight, and to see exactly, I know he's got the same as me, I've got the same as him, and we're trying as hard as we can to outdo each other. And we're not in the same raid, we're not even in the same realm, we're on completely different time zones, but we can do that, and then we feel like I'm a good player. Now, what I can tell you is, personally, I gave up DPS in late WoD because we were doing Black Hand and we'd had 200 pulls, and at no point was my DPS consistent. And what that meant was that I can be as good as I want to be, I can plan as far ahead as I want to plan, and the result isn't in my hands anymore. And that made me very dissatisfied, and certainly it also becomes a bit of a meme when we have Infinite Stars then come into the game. And you know, abilities like that, where we're just looking at it and saying, who's in control here? Is the compute, am I just running around? And one thing I do have is video evidence. I have never done more damage on my character than I did before we killed N'Zoth, and I have gained 10 item levels since then, purely down to RNG.
Alright, so this is devolving into the RNG. Competitive gamers hate RNG. But that's a whole other discussion I've tackled many times. So let's go back to the tangent, the big tangent. Here it is. Okay, so historically on my channel, I've tried to carry the flag of the socializers, you know, the role players, the explorers, you know, like a lot of the player types that have been sort of neglected and discarded over the years. A lot of what retail WoW, you know, modern WoW over the last several expansions has become is a game for achievers, right? And so I'm going to do something different tonight. And I'm going to say, screw all of the rest of you. I'm just going to work on a game for achievers. So you guys can show yourselves out. If you want to explore, be social, whatever, there's the door. We're only going to interact with achievers tonight. Because this is what I think a lot of this comes down to. And Preach even admitted player power is kind of chief on his mind when it comes to how he interacts with the game, right? So I'm going to put on my game design hat to make a really good achiever video game as it relates to retail WoW. And so temporarily I'm going to stop caring about all the other types. And so, okay, so here's what I imagine is the breakdown in player types within the achiever community, right? So this is a game for achievers only now, let's just say. So there's the, whoa. So here's one group, and they're at the top. These are the try-hard, not the try-hards, but the super hardcore, right? I see. This is the hardcore group right here. These are the guys that they're the world first chasers, right? They're the guys who maybe aren't very skilled, but are, you know, simming everything and understand the game's systems and math and everything that goes with how to derive player power. They're super knowledgeable, but they may not be, you know, the best at skills and stuff like that, right? But they're part of that. Like they're essentially creating the meta. They're establishing the meta through math and experimentation and everything else, right? So they're doing a lot of the lion's share of the work. And so these are the super hardcore guys, right? They accomplish everything, you know, before most other people do. And everyone else just sort of oohs and ahs, right? These are the true flexers, right? Okay, then there's this group, right? The main group. We're going to call this group the chasers, right? They really want to be in this pack, but they lack something, whether that's social skills to be in a good guild, right? They you know, they just don't get along well with others, whatever it is. They're not good enough mechanically. They don't understand the game well enough. They don't have enough knowledge, you know, for you know, to compete. You know, there's a lot of skills that go into it. This could also be all the guys who have lives, right? These are the guys who, you know, have families, have jobs. They just don't have the time to commit, right? And so they can't quite break into this group. So they're lacking something, right? Then there's this group. Oh, we're going to call this group. We're going to call this group tongue-in-cheek meta slaves. Right? Okay, so they can't they can't quite break into this, but they get the trickle down, right? These guys establish the meta. These guys are like, oh, okay. We're just going to borrow, right? And again, they're trying to get into this group, but they don't have whatever skills, right? They don't have the skills that, and again, it's a variety of skills. I fit into this, right? I fit into this group. I don't have the time, the dedication, the knowledge. Like, I have a lot of knowledge about WoW, but you know, I just can't commit to the level required to be here. And then there's this group. We'll just call them filthy casuals. God, it is difficult. So these are the filthy casuals. They're chasing the transmogs. They're worried about, you know, how they look. And this is like the last vestige of the socializer explorer. Just gross, right? Like, I don't know. They're running around role-playing or doing some other nonsense. They shouldn't even be in the game, but they think it's fun. And for some reason, they're making their own fun. I don't know. Ridiculous, right? Get out. Disgusting. That's right. Okay, so this is the breakdown of the achievers, right? They're not even trying to be meta slaves. You know, these guys are just playing their own game. And they're going to be gone soon because the game doesn't really, you know, appeal to them anymore. Anyway, so okay, so the first big question, and we're gonna make a game for these groups. So where's Preach? Where do you guys say? Where would you say Preach is? Which group? I see. Yeah, I suppose I should fix that, but all right. Top of meta slaves. Okay, yeah. So I think it's funny because I want to place him in here, right? I feel like he's part of this group, but the way he's talking puts him down here, right? And I'll explain what I mean by that. And it's not a dig on him, by the way. Because again, like, okay, let me redefine this group, and that will help explain. These are the guys that do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to succeed, right? There's no complaining. They don't care how they look. They don't care how it sounds. They don't care what people think of them. They live in a basement. They're virgins. They're neckbeards. They are basement dwellers, right? Like, they do whatever it takes, right? All they do, they're no-lifers. They do whatever it takes. They don't complain, right? They just figure out the best way to dominate in this game. That's all. That's it. And they commit their lives to it. Dedication, right? So every time Preach tells me I have to give up my transmog, I have to change my covenant, right? He sounds like he's in this group, right? Because this group is like, oh, I want to be in here, but I also want to look really snazzy, right? I want to make sure I get to wear the pink hat, you know? I want to make sure that I get to play this specific race-class combo that I think is really cool. I want to be like the guy in Conan the Barbarian, right? I want to be naked, shirtless, with a big two-handed sword, right? And also I want to be the highest DPS in the game, right? Well, screw you. You don't get to be that. Or maybe you're that, but you don't get to be automatically, right? You have to do whatever it takes. So if that means being a gnome warrior with, you know, the Thunder Fury transmog or whatever it is, that's what you do, right? There's no question. You do whatever it takes, right? You don't get to play dress up. You don't get to do any of the fun role-playing things. You're about domination, right? So so that's why I feel like Preach is sometimes talking about this group. And he's also trying to champion this group, by the way, which is totally fair and kind of awesome, right? And I love that there's a lot of people that look up to Preach, be like, yeah, totally. Preach, right? Because that, you know, like, because I like that people that want to role play a little bit. That's what we should have, right? Like, don't we kind of want WoW to have a nice mixture of those things, right? Like, how many people complain about meta slavery? The whole idea that this game is so dominated by the meta, right? And that there's no way to break from it. You can't just play for fun. You can't make bad decisions and goof around, right? Like, quite a few people make that claim, and they and I agree with it. It's like it's too tight, right? Everything is just too focused on achievement, trying to get into this group, right? The top 1%, right? And I think there's a lot of people that would have a lot of fun in this group, right? But the game doesn't appeal to this group, and they're trying to be in this group, even though it doesn't really fit. And this group is trying to be in this group. So everyone's trying to move upwards because, again, it's an achievement-oriented game, but it's not comfortable, right? So you get this swelling of the ranks, right? This abscess that's full of pussy, disgusting meta slaves. And they're not comfortable. They're not happy. They're angry. And they're like, oh, I just want to play the game some more, right? So anyway, there's a couple different ways out of this, right? And you know, I've preached a lot on my channel about, I think, how to get back to that classic feeling. How you doing, Rump, by the way? I see you talking there. By having the game appeal to more types of players, right? Because then this group expands, right? When you have achievers up here, and you know, sort of the lion's share of people down here are like non-achievers, then this group gets to be bigger because it includes more of these people that actually are achievers but aren't as good, and then they get to flex on this whole group who is just running around having fun, right? And then at the bottom here, just, you know, there's, I don't know what we call these people. People that can't figure out how to punch their credit card information in, I guess. Or that there's a right click on the mouse button. Thank you, Ron, for the 500 rage bits. Rage! Eskimo for some reason. So anyway, I think that's one way out of this whole predicament, right? Is I go back to sort of classic, where a lot of people are just happy running around, exploring the game, socializing, playing at their own pace. And then this group is just like super hardcore, and there's variation within this, and they get to flex on everyone below them instead of like everyone wishing they were in here, right? But they're not in there, and that makes them really unhappy. And so they're just kind of angry, right? So there's another way. There's another way to... So here's the achiever. Again, it's like... I'm designing the game now for achievers, right? And so I'm trying to fix this from the only achievers standpoint. And here's what the meta slaves are asking for. Meta slaves are asking for this group to look like this, right? This is what they actually want, right?
Dylan, you son of a bitch.
This is what they believe can occur if Blizzard just fixes things, right? If it's less grindy, if it's just slightly easier to accomplish everything, right? They think that they're going to get this, but they're really never going to get this, right? And the reason for that is well, the reason is complicated, but let me just say that does anyone have an example of a game like this where everything is sort of achievable pretty easily? and how unsatisfying that is to like the achievement oriented person, right? Because once you realize anyone can get it, Goat Simulator, mobile games, there you go, BFA, ouch. Once you realize that everyone around you is sort of like has the, you know, has what you have, then it loses its luster, right? And so they're trying to push the game in this direction, but it's working against what they want, right? Because here's what they actually want. They want, at the end of the day, each achiever wants to be right here, and then they want the game to be just hard enough so that only they can get there and everyone else is below them, right? Just barely hard enough so that only they can achieve it. They're the only person at the top, and everyone else they get to flex on, right? But that doesn't happen for most of these people, right? Because there's just always somebody that's willing to spend more time or is a little better at the game, or, you know, whose neck beard is a little bit longer and bushier, you know, whatever it is, right? So you don't really get this, but that's what they want. So what I would suggest, this is where I get experimental as the achiever designer, right? Is I would actually stretch the difficulty curve even more, right? And this is one of those things I was going to say that a lot of you guys are going to be like, what? This is crazy, right? But here's what I mean by this. So when you're designing a game, right, what do you want to do first? Here's level 1, and here's max, right? So level 1 for the achievers, you want to give them a taste, right? The hook, right? So you're running around Goldshire, and you get this quest, and it says go kill candles and go kill kobolds and get the candle, right? So you go out there and you kill the kobold. He's like begging you, no, take candle, and you take it anyway. You totally dominate, and you come back to Goldshire, and you see all the noobs running out of Northshire, and you're just like, oh yeah, man, look at me. I got this candle. You don't have a candle. I got this candle. That's because I'm awesome, right? Totally flexing on all these noobs, right? And that's the taste, right? You're like, oh, that feels pretty good. That feels real good. Okay, what else does the game have in store? And then we slowly start ratcheting up the difficulty, right? Now you got to get to level 10. Now you got to get to level 20. You got to level 40. You got to get your mount, right? Things get a little bit more difficult, more and more difficult, right? And you find yourself flexing on more and more people, right? And then at the end game, it gets real serious. You keep ratcheting up the difficulty, right? And so what's happening in Classic right now? That's right. That gold mine was no joke. I feel you, Zuckle. So what's happening in Classic right now? BWL is out, right? BWL. How many guilds are completing BWL, right? Now look to the future. What percentage of guilds are going to finish, clear Encourage, right? AQ40. How many guilds are going to complete Nax, right? And don't say it's 100%. It's not. It's not 100%. Some are having difficulty on BWL. I know it's weird, right? But okay. Fair enough. Let's say it's 100%, but it is going to get smaller. That percentage is going to go down. Now, this group here, they're going to crush it naked, right? Eventually, they're going to set all kinds of new records, right? Because nothing stops this group, right? But eventually, like this group, a lot of this group, right, is BWLing, right? And they're doing it successfully. But this group's going to get cut up, right? Once on AQ40, right? Once Nax comes out, this group is going to start getting cut up, right? Some aren't going to be able to make it. And that's going to be, I think, a good thing. Because it's going to give a lot of them something to strive for. It's going to give more layers of flexing, right? for all the achievers that are in the game. Because ultimately that's what the game is about, right? Is flexing for achievers, right? Achievers just want to flex. They want to accomplish as much as they possibly can and then flex on everybody below them, right? And they don't necessarily care about the challenge or the experience, right? Or at least it's very secondary. Again, they want it to be just challenging enough so that they can get past it, but mostly just so they can flex, right? It ultimately comes down to flexing, right? Some of them like, it being challenging. Some of them really are into the experience, and they remember it fondly, right? When they talk about it in the past, they will talk about how much they liked the experience. But their core overriding, ambition is, again, just being at the top and flexing, right? So when I talk about like how to design a game for achievers, I think we should just stratify like all the different tiers of challenge, right? Because then you can establish a really nice pecking order, right? And that's ultimately what you want. Like, again, there's only 2 pecking orders here, right? You're either in this group, which is really difficult to get into, or you're in this group. And it's like, this is what like BFA, right, has essentially created, because they want everyone to raid. They want everyone to do, like all the content, right? But, and so everyone's a raider, right? Everyone's in this category because, well, yeah, I've raided, but you haven't really raided. You haven't really accomplished anything meaningful, right? And so just being a raider was like something you could say, yeah, I'm a raider. Like, we actually do this. We actually got through Molten Core, right? That's an accomplishment. Or at least it was, right? And so I think these need to be better defined, and I think this needs to be stretched a little bit, again, to give that tier, right? If I'm only thinking about achievers, then I think more tiers of challenge is actually really good, because then you have this whole sweet hierarchy of flexing that's going on, right? And also, this group, I should also say, there's lots of skills you need to get into this group, right? And I'll reference the example of Joker, who was the fastest leveler, right? So the fastest leveler zooms to the top, right? He's got great soloing skills. And so he gets to the top, he's the first level 60, and then he sits there, right? And he's waiting for everyone else to catch up so that he can go do now group content, right? And then there's the group of 5, right? 5 friends, and they're leveling together, and they don't get there as fast as he does, but they pass him once it comes to doing the dungeon content, right? Because they just keep rolling, and he has to find 4 other dudes that are solo, right? But maybe he doesn't have the social skills, right? Like maybe he ninja loots, right? Whoops. And he gets kicked out of guilds, right? So now he's having trouble raiding. And so you need both like really good at the game skills, but you also need the social skills to be able to work in a group. And then when it's a 40-man raid, right, you need leadership, and you need strategists, and you need loot council, and you need, right, like there's a whole other set of skills to get in there and get raiding, right? Like, and this guy might not fit, and these guys might not fit, right? So there's a whole bunch of skills that get you into this group effectively and consistently. And that's good. That's good and it's the kind of thing that WoW does that many other genres don't have to deal with. All you have to do is be really good solo. All you have to do is be really good in small numbers, right? but WoW puts this pressure on you to be well-rounded and, you know, have a lot of different skills. And there's lots of things that can stratify you here again. And so there's lots of different avenues and axes by which you can compete, right? And so this is what I think is more appropriate. Like, if we're going to go down the retail path, which it's gone down, and it's an achievement-oriented game, I think it should be stretched out even further. And so two things combine here. One, Preach is pretty much in this group. He wants to be in this group, and I think obviously he has what it takes to be in this group. But when he talks, it sounds like he's kind of moving towards this group. Because, again, hardcore, they don't care about the obstacle, right? There's no excuses, right? I can be the scrub. I can say, I just want to make a warlock and find a nice fire sword that has a proc on it for some fire damage. I'm going to run Firestone, and I'm going to put a fiery weapon enchant on there, and it's going to be a blast. It's going to be super fun, right? But that makes me a scrub, right? I'm never going to be in a hardcore raiding guild because I'm having fun. I'm playing for fun, right? So no excuses. This is the no excuse club. The other thing it is it's willing to do whatever it takes, right? And so when he says things like, I don't want to have to train up a new covenant, right? If, you know, I want to try something out, or if I want to see if it's better, or I just want to mess around, or I want that transmog that goes with it, or I really like the style and the look of Bastion versus Revendreth or whatever. That puts you in here, man. You can't talk about that stuff if you want to be in this group. This group just does whatever it takes, right? And so Ian could, and that's what Ian's trying to do with the covenants. He's trying to stretch, right? He's trying to create some identity, but he's also trying to stretch the power curve a little bit by saying, if you choose the wrong covenant and you run with a bunch of abilities that you wanted to try out and you were wrong, you got to go back and roll a different one and figure out the right one, right? No excuses, just go do it, right? If you rolled the wrong race and class and you spent all day or all week making that race and class and you found out dwarf priests are just better, guess what, buddy? Reroll a dwarf priest. Get on it. We want to see you back up here with a max level dwarf priest ASAP. You do whatever it takes, right? No complaining. Whatever it takes. So this is kind of where I would go. This is what I would do. Create a better stratified thing. I'd make accomplishments more tiers of accomplishments. Make the base level of things a little difficult. Now this is it's also tough to do because there might also be trying to widen the game at the same time to say, well, we want role players and socializers back in here, explorers back in here. So this is very specific to I'm wearing the achiever only hat. And so this is more difficult to do if you're trying to accommodate lots of different groups. But it's also difficult to do because they've put all the story and all the world stuff sort of behind raiding, right? So you have to raid and down the bosses to get the cinematics to know what's going on, right? Which is really unfortunate. But I actually think they should try to separate the two, right? I feel like they should try to design a game for the achievers and design a game that also works with people that just want to explore the world and know the story, right? We're going to talk about Bellular a little later, but Bellular is like, after watching several of his videos, I feel like he loves lore more than anything in the game, right? He is so excited about where the story is going and brainstorming ideas on all the secrets and where it could be going and all that stuff. And yet the game sort of forces him to raid to figure out what the stuff is, right? What's going on with the game. Like, what if there were a totally different path, right, for lore people, and you had to choose, right? Like, you didn't have to raid and be part of this group in order to get all the lore. You would go on your own side quests, you know, that rewarded you a little bit, but more in lore, right? I think that would be pretty interesting thought experiment. But anyway, so keep that in mind as we watch the rest of this video, because I think again, I think Preach is in that hardcore group, but he's trying to leverage sort of the meta slave complaining group to get a change in to the game where he doesn't have to, you know, put in as much time. And I totally appreciate this, because he's running a content creation business, right? He's a busy guy. He can't be in the no-lifer club, right? It's really hard for him to be in that no-lifer club and be a content creator and do all the other things, right, that he's trying to do in life, right? It's tough. So, but at the end of the day, that group, that hardcore group, is for a very specific clientele. Again, they live in their basements. They've never seen a boob. They're neckbeards. They're no lifers, right? We love them. We love them, and that's what they're put on this planet to do. And they deserve to be able to flex on everyone else, right? But not everyone's going to make it into that group. Not everyone. Yeah, not even on the internet. Okay? You don't have time for that. You should be grinding. Not boobs. Oh my god, Automata's going crazy. Anyway, let's keep watching.
And it's extraordinarily dissatisfying to have that experience, whereas you guys always...
By the way, for context, we're back to RNG now. I don't know how long that segue took, but we're back to RNG. Complaining about RNG, and you know, him and his buddy are exactly the same gear level, and they want to see which one is more skilled, but RNG is getting in the way. There are limits to RNG, but it's so funny that he's complaining about it when they've worked so hard to take RNG out of the game with no misses and no glancing blows and all that stuff, right? Kind of consistently, and then they've replaced it with other kinds of RNG that they think is more palatable, but not necessarily. So it's pretty interesting. All the procs, right?
I mean, for me, this is what's very strange about this whole thing, is one of the big feedbacks we had from WOD, which a lot of people dislike for various reasons. But the classes, super simple. He kept it super simple. He gave us some wonderful new spells, and class design was great. People could swap. We could just change and re-roll, just get some gear, and off you go to the races. What we didn't have was people setting up islands in their bedroom so they could go and farm AP, or doing world quests over and over again. And you know, and now we're looking certainly at the high end this time, where it looks much worse. But I'd also come that's that part. But earlier you brought up Legion, and I would say that yes, the legendaries. I mean, they were so RNG, it was difficult to swap between specs regardless. I don't think I was able to do it until the Nighthold. But the artifact weapons were our choice. And this is why we do have this pessimism, is we were told by you guys, look, we know you guys are worried about choosing artifact weapons, where you're going to put this AP, so we're not going to change anything. And 2 weeks into the expansion, you had to alter the rogue ones because of the balances issues after we went live. And all those rogues said, you told us you weren't going to do this, and then you guys did it. And that's why we have this definite pessimism, where we just think, ultimately, for the content I enjoy, this severely disrupts things. I do truly believe it's going to disrupt things from...
It disrupts things. I can't get into the content I enjoy as fast as I would like, given all the other constraints on my time, skill, whatever it is. But again, I would say you got to earn it. If you want to be one of the bleeding edge, hardcore world firsters, you got to earn it. You have to be willing to sacrifice, right? That's one thing that the rank 14 achieves, right? The rank 14 in Classic, right, achieves, and there's a lot of criticism I would place at that system, right? I would levy against that system, but there's no casual rank 14s, right? And obviously it glorifies time a lot more than it does skill, but you need both, right? And you need a lot of time, right? So there's no casual rank 14s, right? The guys who have done that have done it, right? And they've earned it. So, and that's a thing, right? Like, I know people will want to begrudge those people. Well, you're just a no-lifer, but they still earned it, right? And that's kind of what the MMO contract is all about. Some combination of time and skill. And you can argue how much in each, depending on the system you're talking about. But the more of those you put in, the more you're going to get out of the MMO. This is not just a game; it's a world that you live in. It's your second home, or even your first home, depending on how much time you spend in the world. But that's the contract. The more of those things you put in, the more you're going to get out. And this idea that, people want to diminish that, right? In order to accomplish all the things that they want and still have lots of other things, that diminishes the whole experience and sense of achievement for everybody. So I think, and this is a tough ask, right? But achievers have to realize they're either going to go for the things, right? Or try to be comfortable with not being able to achieve those things, right? And yeah, some of you were talking about Gladiator, right? It's just like, or just lower ranks, right? You're either going to go for rank 14 or die trying, right? In terms of like quitting the game. Or be satisfied with rank 10 or whatever else it is. And realize it's beyond you. And that's okay. But don't ask the developers to hand you rank 14 just because you can't quite get there or don't want to get there. Just leave rank 14 for the people that are willing to sacrifice, right?
For a lot of people, in about 2 to 3 months, when that guy sees, let's say his DK chooses Kyrian because he loves Kyrian, it's so good. And you're saying, okay, yeah, but you can go and try out the other abilities in, say, a Torghast closed environment or something. It's like, well, that's not what I want to do. I want to go PvP with it for now. I want to drag people around Warsong Gulch for a couple of days.
Cake and eat it too. No, Preach. No. They were the bets run. You can't just go play with it. No. I'm going to say no. I'm going to put my foot down. No. You want to go play with it? Go earn it. You want to play a different class, different race? Remake.
But I still love Kyrian. I love the MOG. I love the theme. I love the weekly event. I love what I've done in my zone. And now, for the first time ever, you're telling me that if I really want to do that, I actually have to re-roll a second DK to be able to do that realistically without having to overcome massive jumps and hurdles. And to all these things, we just feel like we're retreading the same ground, which was the similar thing with the Azerite armor, where, throughout the entire alpha, we were saying this isn't going to work how you guys hope. And then we spent the next maybe 6 or 7 months fidgeting through it until ultimately it was like, okay, we're just going to open it up. Sorry, there was a lot in your statement that I was trying to get through there.
Totally. Okay, so it's also a lot in yours. Let's see. So
Yeah, this is why we have the conversation, I guess.
I completely agree on like RNG mechanics and variants within combat in terms of your performance, the range, like the delta between high end and low end infinite stars procs or whatever, is not a particularly satisfying aspect of gameplay. I think there's room for those things, but they shouldn't be the things that are the highest performers in the hands of competitive players. There's a lot that we've learned from essences, from corruption, from various trinkets, particularly like it's been a topic of a lot of internal discussion among the team. The same way when we're designing a talent row, if there is an active button that requires skillful use and just a pretty much fire and forget passive in the row, the passive shouldn't be the theoretically optimal performing talent as compared to perfect use of the active ability that's much harder to execute. If the passive ends up being better in the hands of someone who is misusing or underusing the active, that's totally fine. But even just evaluating damage corruptions like gushing or infinite stars against stat corruptions,
They have an ability called gushing. Amazing. Yeah, it depends on the passive, obviously. Passives can do a lot of things. You can misuse passives as well. But I do take his point. I take his point that, yeah, it's generally you want a skill-based thing to perform a little better when used with high skill. So that's totally fair. That was a good comment, actually. Is it better to, when it comes to changing your identity, if it's possible, is it better to give you content that allows for that change that's new, or have you re-roll, and basically redo content you've already done? That's a really tough one. That's a really tough one to answer because content, or like redoing content, the experience is a combination of the content you're doing and the tools you have to use in that content, right? So, like, if you're re-rolling a character class, for example, if all you're doing is re-rolling like Dwarf Priest as opposed to Human Priest, then redoing the content's going to feel very samey, right? But if you're re-rolling a different class, you're now a rogue, that's potentially a very different experience because of the context. So much has changed contextually. And so that can be very different and very fun and very fresh and very new. Even if you toss out like all the class-specific quests. Or even, like you're switching Horde or Alliance, right? And then also just the quality of the content is going to matter as well. But all those things being equal, it's a tough one to answer. I think psychologically, people might feel like re-rolling is going to have a better sense of permanence. Like, once I have this thing, I'm going to have this thing. As opposed to like the Covenant switch, which you're changing because you want to do this other thing, but in the back of your mind you're not convinced that you won't have to change it again in the future, right? Which can weigh on you the whole time you're doing this content, right? As opposed to, I'm going to have a second character that's, once I have, and it feels like I've earned more of a thing, right? It's hard to pinpoint exactly what I'm trying to say there, but I think you guys get it. Good question, though.
Yeah, the stat corruptions should have simmed better, and the fact that they weren't for a large portion of the tier or for many specs is a problem. At the end of the day, if you do well in an encounter or poorly, you should feel like that's because of the, you played well or you played poorly. And yes, sometimes you get targeted with every encounter mechanic, and that's just how things go. But that's a whole separate layer.
Mm-hmm.
that's different from the choices that separate people going into a match, going into an encounter. And I think that's a hallmark of the RPG genre. And I get that, like, the higher you go in skill echelons in all types of gameplay, the more resistance there is to the idea that non-skill associated factors might influence performance. But fundamentally, that is a difference between an RPG-based ecosystem and a typical FPS, MOBA, whatever. If you go play Overwatch, every tracer is tracer. All tracers are equal in terms of what they're capable of. If you get outplayed or you outplay somebody, it's because you were mechanically better at executing. In WoW, people have different gear, different stats, sometimes different choices they've made along the line, and that's not a new phenomenon. That's not something we're trying to introduce for the...
Right, and it's an important distinction between the genres again. Like, there's different types of skills that make you successful in WoW, more so than a game like Overwatch. It calls on a wider range of things, and it leverages those skills in different quantities to be successful. You might not be the best mechanically, but you are so good at social skills that you can keep a guild together, right, and smooth over all the butt hurts that happen between players and loot and all that stuff because you're talking people down from the ledges they're on or whatever it is, right? And then there's guy who knows how to put together a perfect, orientation of talents and items and all that, but he can't quite push the buttons as fast as the guy next to him who sucks at all those things, but he can push those buttons perfectly, right? So there's just a whole lot of different skill sets that create, various forms of success, and there's some equivalencies across because of those different skills, and people can mesh in different ways, and that's what's so amazing about the overall idea of an RPG, is this combination of skills that go into making people be successful. And achievers or high-end players want the game to cater to their set of strengths specifically and nobody else's, right? But again, it's this pressure towards normalizing the one thing, and if the game developers agreed to that, then all of those achievers would feel dissatisfied with the results because everyone around them would be just like them, right? They would lose their sense of identity in terms of, I did this thing and it's because of this unique combination of skills that I have, rather than everyone around me is exactly like me. There's no distinctiveness, right? So the identity is not just in character, but the identity is in player as well. And it's important for, I think, an MMO, which is again a different kind of genre, to cater to lots of different types of identities and skill sets and everything else than like what he's talking about with an FPS, like an Overwatch type game. So again, I agree with Ian here.
The first time in a game that hasn't had it, and you can go back and look at folks playing Classic right now, and whatever. You have Thunder Fury. Do you have Warglaves? Did you manage to get this? Do you have the one thing that your guild saw over the course of 3 months? Did you get that trinket? That's going to make a difference, and you might beat the other rogue or beat the other mage in your guild on a regular basis because of that character power factor. And
what do I think? What level of commitment do I think would be reasonable for swapping covenants? That's another great question. Or do you think they should not be able to switch? I think one of the things that makes Diablo 2 a better game than Diablo 3 is because if you wanted to try a different skill set with your barbarian, you had to re-roll completely, right? The fact that I can have one barbarian and switch constantly between all the different options, I think makes Diablo 3 a worse game when it comes right down to it. And now you could say that's just my personal opinion as a player. um, and I could say fair enough. But as a game designer, I would say, not subjectively, but objectively, that the game is not as compelling, right? Because of that big change. And yeah, people didn't like it, right? But again, I think that's a thing that people complain about, but ultimately it's in their interest to keep, right? In order to make the game more compelling. And I think that that's true in WoW as well. There are things that people don't like. They don't like being deprived of things, but it's an important part of the experience because we have to have things to strive for, right? When you have nothing left to strive for, you lose interest. And so part of that striving is having things that are out of your reach, right? Not quite sure if this build is perfect, not quite sure that I'm doing things right. Maybe if I did something just slightly different with this build or with this thing, and I got to put in some more work to achieve, that, to realize that ambition, right? And that's what keeps you compelled, it keeps you engaged, it keeps you playing, right?
And I get that, we hear this from top arena players. The higher up you go, the more that bothers you. But, and we understand that feedback, it's not a surprise to us, but across the totality of the game and the broader audience, it's that potential for, differentiation between other characters, excitement, growth in power, progression that isn't purely tied to your own skill.
Stay thirsty, my friends. That's
the genre.
Right. So good. So
I think that's where we try to inject choice and differentiation. And some of this isn't RNG, some of it is, but other parts are conscious decisions that a player made. Going back, so I think...
sorry for this. It's kind of unrelated. I'm interacting with chat more than the video, but yeah, I think WoW having more investment in a character does make people not want to reroll as much. Yeah, those things are connected irrevocably, right? The more invested you are, the less you want, the more meaning it has, and the less you want to give up on it to make something new, right? But you can't have one without the other. So they are connected in our minds and in our emotions. And that's what creates value, right? The rarer it is, the more value it has, right? Same thing. Those things are connected. And of course, we all want the thing that's rare and valuable, but once we all have it, it no longer has value. Its value is greatly diminished because everyone has one. So again, it's like you have to manage those things really carefully, and you have to artificially create value, appreciation, identity, and the way to do that is through deprivation, right? Not everyone can have all the things.
I think historically, gear served much more of this function in a way that wasn't as prominent. It wasn't like an advertised expansion feature. It's just how the game worked. And we have streamlined, kind of chipped away at some of those underlying factors in a way that risks removing that specialization entirely. And that's why you see us trying to reintroduce it, because we think there is value in one person's warrior being slightly different from another person's warrior based on choices they made in terms of areas they want to specialize in. Like going back years, yeah, you needed a full separate set of tank gear from your DPS gear. Today, it's pretty much just trinkets, maybe weapons, right? Whether it was different set pieces, different stats that you needed, defense, parry, you name it. And the choices that you made every week, what is your loot specialization for this? Or what are you going to spend your currency on first, this item or that item? Help shape someone's potential such that there was a meaningful difference between someone who specialized in playing one role or someone who played multiple. And both paths had their advantages. Like the person who was just, tank all the time, they want to be the best tank in the world, they made every possible gearing decision around getting the best tank gear. they could be a few percent better in terms of their overall mitigation, aside from their additional level of skill and comfort playing the spec, versus someone who was also playing a lot of DPS and gearing for that as well. But the latter player is much more versatile. If you need to drop a tank, or you're playing a swing role, or you're participating in different types of activities in the game, there are tons of things they could do that the diehard tank could not. We've removed those barriers over time, and while there's natural quality of life improvement to that, of course, not having a restriction is always going to immediately feel better than having a restriction. Part of what we've seen over the history of WoW is that friction also has positive benefits that aren't immediately apparent until that friction is removed. Going all the way back to,
This is a very important point he's making. And I feel like the light bulb's going on and off in his head, going on in his head. Is he realizing these things for the first time, or has he always known these? Or is he feeling some regret, right? And I'll let him finish answering, because I don't know that maybe he's just playing. It's a trade-off, right? There's no right or wrong answer here. But I feel like there is a right or wrong answer, right? And it's about establishing value of things by, again, depriving people. And he might trying to be diplomatic, but does he, if I pin him down, would he believe that he wants to go back, a couple expansions? He wants to put some of those restrictions back in, to create more choices and more that more sense of agency about how I'm going to control my player experience, how I'm going to be exactly what I want, which is I want to be the best tank. That's all I care about. So I'm going to make all those decisions. Or do I want to be more flexible so I can play this way during the day and this way at night, which is a different way? What matters to me? How do I accomplish that? What choices do I make to achieve those goals? And then all of those things are going to help make me happy, right? But part of that is, again, living that dream. What is my dream? And how does the game help me make choices that are meaningful? Again, meaningful choice that help me accomplish those goals and live that specific dream I've laid out for myself. And how is that dream different from the guy next to me who is close but not quite, and we feel different and we live a slightly different dream, but the difference is meaningful.
Something like the random group finder and LFG. And sure, it's super easy and convenient to be able to push a button and have a group of group mates to run a dungeon with, but did that do some things to erode a sense of community and fellowship? Sure it did. And similarly, a lot of these choices we've made mechanically to streamline spec switching, multi-role play, again, they have lots of upsides, but taken too far, they risk too much homogenization in a way that removes depth.
Ian's all grows up. He's getting all grows up, everybody. He's learning. He's growing. He's going to be a real boy soon. I love to poke fun at Ian, but I honestly think he's starting to say the words, right? He's starting to understand the consequences of a lot of the things that he's helped implement into the game that have had consequences, right? And now maybe he's got some regrets. He's got some regrets about some of these choices. Oh, the regrets. They're painful.
There's a few things there that are interesting points. And I'm just thinking, everything you described about the players who were able to prioritize where they wanted to go, other players who...
But here's the thing. This talk is not what players want to hear, right? When you ask players, right, should I take away flying? Should I take away Dungeon Finder? right? Everyone freaks out. Everyone goes ape shit when it comes like, well, no, what are you doing? Right? Like, so these are dangerous thoughts when it comes to like PR, right? So it's not in his interest to talk about these things in terms of like taking it away, right? It's very, very bad, but he's willing to do it. And that's, again, that's what I think. That's why I'm thinking, well, he's becoming a good designer, right? Right? Because he's thinking about the integrity of the game a little bit more than the average player has to, right? And he's thinking about depriving you of things and saying no, right? No, you can't have your candy. You gotta eat your meat before you can have any pudding, right? And these are important. These are important things for a designer to think about that players don't want to hear, right?
Prioritized and going multi-different wings. It keeps coming back to me that was still entirely, even from the very earliest days of World of Warcraft, from day one, that was still something that was entirely in the player's hands, and every single one of them had the choice to do that should they want to. Like the barriers we're talking about are, say, gold, for example. That would be the only barrier to prevent you to do that, rather than your interest. So while it's true that, you know, somebody who goes pure DPS or whatever on their Demon Hunter, sure, they'll reach a point where they're maybe slightly better than the other guy, but that was the other player's complete freedom to be able to say, well, I'm still a Demon Hunter and I like tanking and I want to go that way as well. And obviously this varies across the player base. Is we can look at certain players and they'll do all three specs if they want to. And that's entirely their choice, and the game has never at any point said, well, we're actually going to actively stop you doing that. We're going to prevent you from doing that because in your minds, you don't want that to happen anymore. And that's where I think we kind of hit this wall. Is like, you're actively saying we can't do that anymore, despite the fact that we've enjoyed that freedom, if we wanted to do it, for many, many years. Coming back to the RPG thing as well, and this is a little confusing, certainly, to obviously try and appease everybody, which is what we would like to see happen. Is all the elements are seemingly in place in Shadowlands to not even have this be a big deal.
Don't panic about the windows.
All the soulbinds, for example, are all part of the main story quests of every zone. We encounter them, we make friends with them, we help them. They're all people there. And for me, and maybe I'm way off base here, but if we're looking to really instill this sense of RPG, which the Covenants do, if I think about the best RPGs I've played, everything from Mass Effect to New Vegas, and old people games, I guess. we're in old people territory.
The old stupid
I think about
boomers. Boomergames.com. Boomer Games Entertainment. That needs to be a game studio name. What are your thoughts on time investment into character spec or covenants? Yeah, you're sinking time into something and having it change without warning. What's the answer? Balance. Yeah. I mean, the only thing that never changes is that everything changes, right? And that's okay, I think. We hate change, but some of it is okay because it keeps it fresh. It challenges us, right? Do you really want to get complacent about your gameplay experience? I think that complacency is a trap. Like people want things to stay the same forever in their mind, but it doesn't really feel good at the end of the day, because don't you want to be challenged? Don't you want to have to look at things again, in a new light, in a new context, go back at it, get back in there, fight again to get back to the top, right? Like that's the whole idea of ongoing content, right? Is I'm never done, like I can't, like as opposed to any other single player game, I'm done with this game. I can put it on the shelf. I can love it forever. The experience was amazing, but I'm done with it. I don't have to go back. I'll play the next one when it comes out, if it ever comes out. Duke Nukem, anyone? but I think part of the contract of an online, of like an MMO, is we pay the subscription so that they'll keep changing things on us, right? And we get moments, you know, you get moments of it's solved, right? And I don't have to, you know, I don't have to play. I can just enjoy, you know, flexing on everybody that I completed and I figured it out. But at some point in the future, things are going to change again, and I'm going to have to get back up, strap on the old armor again, and pick up the sword and go back in, right? And it might get tiring over time, right? Like, oh, here we go again, right? We've all felt that at times, right? But that's kind of the contract. That's what we signed up for, and it's a lot like life, you know. Like, that's part of the process. You don't really get to rest on your laurels, you know, forever. So it is nice to take a break, though. Every once in a while, but I think at the end of the day, the contract is, nope, you gotta keep going back in.
Companions that I choose in Baldur's Gate, I choose my companions, and I try and build that squad. So if I choose to go Kyrian because I love everything.
Do I poop on TBC? I agree, J50. I think there's a lot of amazing stuff in TBC. So don't think that I think all of TBC is bad, because I think it's very, like, it's my favorite game in terms of the classes and the talents and the specs and like all of that stuff. But there are things in there that I don't like quite a bit, right? I don't like flying mounts, right? So, it's really close in terms of, like, when people ask me what's the best, right? The best experience. It's a tough decision for me. Like, I think classic edges it out, or vanilla edges it out just barely, but not in the stuff that I worked on, right? So it's a tough one for me. So there are mistakes are made, but it's still an amazing game.
About Kyrian, but the soulbinds are they're not right, okay? Like, we went live, they're not right. Some of them are completely over the top. We're already aware of, and obviously the lofty goal is to make sure this isn't the case, but historically it has been the case, is that there are some that are way out of whack, and you don't even get to try the soulbinds or see the soulbinds until you cap, unless you're somebody who's going to do extra research. Then wouldn't it not be a better, even RPG immersive element to say, right, I really want that Venthir soulbind. That comes with the Venthir ability. But now I have a story quest. I have some sort of RPG immersion factor to try and convince this Venthir,
thank you, Cleric,
to help me as a Kyrian because of the good of the Shadowlands, and they all have different personalities and they respond to it differently. And that's part of my journey on my role-playing, is to immerse myself in that, because I don't think of any game where I say the most, you know, the biggest role-playing element I had in Baldur's Gate was that I chose Fireball over Frostbolt, or that I chose a machine gun over a sniper rifle in Fallout, or any of those things. What I think about is the stories I told, what I decided to do with those companions that I thought in, and that's why it seems like a strange, potentially here to
GB PhD, thank you for the Twitch Prime as well. Yeah, so before he finishes this thought and they move on to something else, he's talking about the journey, the roleplay journey. And the roleplay journey is all about the journey, right? There has to be a journey. So if he's arguing, I'm Bastion, I'm a different Covenant, I'm Covenant 1, I'm Covenant 2, I'm Covenant 1, I'm Covenant 2, which is what, like, talent respec is in the game right now, then there's no journey at all, right? So where's the RPG experience journey that he wants without some journey, right? And this is what he wants. He wants hat switching for power reasons, so that he can, you know, maximize his potential for each new raid challenge, right, that's coming up. but so it's a really weird argument he's trying to make at the same time. But you can't have both. You can't have there be an experience and a fun process and a without putting some time into it, some investment into it. And again, comparing it to weapons like items, those are that's a system that's already in the game that he can switch, you know, whenever he wants to. But it's okay that there's also other decisions that he can't switch, I think, in a game like an RPG. And so there's room for both, but he wants so much of it to be pushed towards the item side so he can be maximally flexible for accomplishing his raid goals that are coming up. But again, trying to serve different masters. I'm going to stop the video there. This will be part 1. It's getting a little bit long, but we got about the other half of the video to watch. So I'll say thank you very much for watching the first part. We'll be back with the second part very soon.
Dylan!
And
Son of a bitch.
we'll finish off this video. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.